Yes, thank you all for coming, for following the invitation. We are here to look at new methods for doing archiving, phonograph archiving. And the idea of the symposium is to bring together ethnomusicologists, archives, of course, signal processing people, music from information retrieval, physical modeling, and to see how we can combine all these. What are the ethnomusicological questions? What are the questions from archiving? And what are the possibilities which we have in music information retrieval? As you've seen, we have several talks in the morning, in the afternoon. We have workshops. We have 2 concerts this evening and tomorrow, as you have seen from the program. And we will have catering here at the Institute. We do not have good opportunities to get some food outside here near around, so we will have catering here. Of course, somebody who wants to have another meal can do this, of course, but you're all set up with that. I think we start right away. Want to give a short introduction to what the basic ideas of our archive, and then we'll see how we progress. We have funding right now from the Deutsche Forschungsgesellschaft, which is about 3 years project, because we have a small archive here. These are recordings from the Middle East from the 10s to the 30s, and we have digital versions from them, which can be accessed online. We thought about doing some music information retrieval with it. So how would it be if people, ethnomusicologists, could upload their recordings to the archive and compare it to the recordings which are already there, make analyses of musical features which are there, and then get information about their own recordings. The problem is, of course, there are so many recordings around nowadays. This is a big data thing, a big data problem. So the question is how we cope with this. Now, of course, there are feature extraction things like, the onset detection, of course. We have extraction things for rhythm and meter. There's been lots of things being done over the last years, 10 or 15 years actually. Pitch extraction is working very well. We have got some references here. Of course, score is a little bit more demanding. We will see some talks about this here. This is a thing which is still a problem and not solved completely, but we need to solve that definitely to get the thing going the way we want it. Tonality has been investigated, of course, in terms of Conan maps. Come to this in a minute. We've got turbo analysis, then analysis of density, of musical form, speech. These are all problems which are there, and this is a feature extraction algorithms around which do it. Some perform better, some perform worse, and the question is in which context to use them, actually. So the basic methods which we use, of course, are Muir tools. This is what we call the Fourier, Capstrom, wavelet, fractal dimensions, and so on. These are basic tools which we use. But there are more advanced ones with hidden Markov models and mixed Gaussian models. We will also have talks about this during the symposium for those who know them to remember, but for those who never have heard about them to see how this works, what is meant by this. Then we've got self-organizing maps, Conan maps, for example. There's 2 kinds of some mappings, the Conan maps and the connectionists. We stick to the Conan maps because this is a well-established tool which works very well. And we have musical acoustics coming with it. So the idea is, and this is what I want to announce here in my talk a little bit more, is if maybe we should go beyond the standard Muir tools of feature extraction, which we know, and include also physical modeling, for example, in musical acoustics. Include other things like visual audio, and for them this is a demand which is not implemented in what we do right now here over the next 3 years in our project, but we want to include this on the longer run. Microphone array techniques is another thing which is very promising, and I'll show an example about this in a minute. because microphone arrays are able to detect the radiation and also then the vibration of the musical instruments. And if you combine them all, it's a new way to look at them and understand things which you could not understand easily before. Wave field synthesis is something which is very much around. Of course, in an archive, it's very hard to implement wave field synthesis because you would need to have an array of loudspeakers around, which most people won't have. But there are more and more wave field synthesis systems at universities. And if you think of applications for universities, then this could be a promising thing for the future. Of course, we have the problem of internet platform in computational ethnomusicology, and we need to address this too, because the question is how people can assess them. How do you maintain these platforms? When the project stops, how would you maintain it over the years and decades? And of course, you've got artificial reality coming in, which we have also a workshop on this in the symposium, to see what's going on in this community and how can we use them in the context of museums, for example, and visualize musical instruments there. The applications, of course, only a selection what's going on in computational musicology, analytical musicology, comparative musicology, systematic musicology. There are so many terms around. We don't care about how you call it. So this is the framework was actually needed for ethnomusicologists to analyze. Then, of course, archives. We have a small archive where we test the system. In the end, when it's working, of course, other archives could use this and do the same thing as our system is doing. Then, of course, you got applications for special issues. You got tonal system of African xylophones. We've seen that. Organology, score extraction, network music performance. This is also something which is very much around, that musicians all around the world can play together simultaneously, which is not possible because of the speed of light. It's too slow. So embarrassing, but true. Tuning of gamelan, we will see an example there in the symposium. Music information retrieval, of course. People who are doing music information retrieval of any kinds. And then special features like in musical acoustics, tonal system, scale detection, which have been done extensively. So this is the framework of our archive, the way we do it, or the way we are implementing it at the moment. Maybe if I get my laser screen. Okay. So this is our archive where our metadata, or the sounds are in. And this is coupled to a metadata structure. This is traditional, that we say, okay, who performed it, when it is performed, whether musicians and so on. But on the other hand, we have the audio files, and we do the analysis process of these audio files, that we have a feature vector extracted from them. And this feature vector is the one which should be ethnomusicologically plausible. We say this feature vector is something which can be used by ethnomusicologists, by people who are interested in that. There's a retrieval engine then, which is looking at them and using the feature extraction then again in the representation. Now the idea is if somebody has a request, he can request about the metadata, he can request about the features which are in the ESRA archive, but he can also upload a file which it just has recorded in the field, and compare it to the recordings which are already there. First of all, use the extraction tools. Maybe just print me a score, print me a melismatic thing or anything, a rhythm, but also compare it to the recordings which are there, and then maybe get hints. This rhythm can also be found in African xylophone music as in gamelan music, or this tonal system, yes, there's the one in China which sounds similar like that. So this is the game, the aim which we are heading for. And of course, there are two complementary ontologies on this. The first is that we say, okay, we have the heuristics. This is the metadata. And then we got these feature extraction, which need to get more and more plausible over the years. In the beginning, you have an algorithm, you put it in, you get an output. But of course, you need to test, is this output reasonable or not? So where are you there? Our feature structure looks like this. This is what we want to implement. This is a basic framework which need to be extended, and we'll talk about the extension then for a minute. Of course, we think of the main features at first. This is timbre, pitch, and rhythm. And the idea, for example, in timbre is that you have two kinds of timbre. First of all, a multi-line timbre and then a single line for single musical instruments. The idea is, you know, if you have a gamelan, then often the melody may not play the main role. So if you're going a gong kebyar and you're at the kebyar, you know, at the bang, yeah, where all the instruments play simultaneously, nobody will sing along a melody in that. So there's a multi-instrument ensemble playing where the thing is actually it's interesting, the pitch itself, the timbre itself. But of course, we're interested in the timbres of single musical instruments, the development of instruments, the development of string instruments, of wind instruments, to compare these timbres over the ethnic groups and over the musics which we are looking for. In the pitch extraction, the basic idea is, of course, to have a score for a multi and a single line thing. So a texture output, which would be a piano roll on the one hand side, and the other thing, there's a single line, because it's most often more easier to extract a single line algorithm rather than a multi-line. And the other thing would be to look at the melismatic things. So if you have a score, you're not don't know anything about the precise pitch of these instruments, but many musical styles actually depend on the melismatics, and so it is also, of course, important to have an algorithm which is detecting right this. And in the rhythm section, of course, we have the multi-line rhythms where we say, okay, we know which instruments are playing at which time and produce what sound, what groove, or whatever you call it, what timeline. And on the other side have a thing which is based on the sound which these instruments all make together. So if you have a rock band playing along, of course, you know that if they play the 1 and the 2 and the 3 and the 4, then at each strike there are many instruments playing and you want to fuse the sound. You're not interested in the single instruments. Often you are only interested in the fused sound, which a sound engineer is actually doing. This is another program which I do not address here. Maybe we can address this in the talks. What to put into archives. Normally in a traditional ethnomusicological framework, we say, okay, we make a field trip, and there's somebody we have, he's playing an acoustic instrument and maybe a singer, an ensemble, and record them. How do we deal with people doing all-in-a-box music, raised in an ethnic group, but do hip-hop, or do electronic music, or experimental music, still in the framework of their music? How do we deal with this? Do we do this in an archive, and in which way do we treat it? So there's an example how it looks like with our archive at the moment. If you go to our webpage, which you may have done or may not have done, this is very much work from the group, which you will get to know during the symposium here, of course. This is a Conan map programmed by Michael Blass, and these are the metadata here. This is one of these recording archives which we have, and they are analyzed now in terms of rhythm. And the rhythm is extracted by a hidden Markov model, which gives a multi-state output. And this multi-state output is then used as the input of a Conan map. How this works, Michael will tell you during a workshop how we do it. So this is the first approach we have for the rhythm. And then you have similarities. So if you know there's one recording here, there may be other recordings in that area around. So you know they have a similar rhythm. So you might be interested to look at this, the other sounds, and just click on them, and you will listen to them. You can hear them. They are streamed to you from the web page, and you can then judge on your own if they are similar or not. But it's a suggestion. Of course, it's not a definite aim. It's still up to the ethnomusicologist to decide, but this is an option. So these are the frames, things which we do, but the things which we are thinking of in the future is, of course, that we want to include other methods too. And one of them is a physical model. And I briefly want to show you here an example of a Patwain drum, the Burmese drum, which I recorded from a field trip. There is a Patwain, which looks like this. I may play the Sane Wayne Orchestra once. This is a recording I did from the Music Conservatory of Mandalay. There was the evening where all the students performed in front of their professors and were judged according to their performance. So they really gave their very best. Okay, I think you got the point. This is the Padvain player. This is a drum circle we will look at in a second. And there are other musical instruments here. The ne, this is a zona-like instruments, and other drum instruments, also a gong chime. This is a recording of a Padvain player, Kaisaf, in Machinya. This is Kachin State, northern Burma. To see this instrument performing on its own, if it's working, which it is not. This is a pity. Okay, we got. Sorry for that. Hopefully this is working. Okay, it worked a minute ago. We had problems with the beamer. Maybe this is caused by that. Sorry for that. Yeah. Okay, so I need to tell you about this. It's a highly virtuosic playing, and maybe you can listen to the drums, single drums. Yeah. So they're pitch drums, and the question is, how could this be? Because a drum is a percussion instrument, and normally you don't say that it is pitched, but it is really pitched here, and it's tuned with this paste here called patsa. And this is a very demanding tuning process. It took about an hour until he had tuned all these drums for the set here, for the session. And it is interesting to see that this paste is actually needed not only to tune the instrument, but also to tune the overtone spectrum. So these are the frequencies of the first partials of that Padvain drum, and these are the frequency ratios. And if you look at them, they're not, at best they would be at 1 to 2 and 1 to 3. So be the octave and the fifth above the octave. And in the middle region, this is working quite well, which is not expected from a drum, because a drum would have an enharmonic spectrum. But if you tune your harmonic overtones to a way that they are harmonic, then you would much more easily have a pitch. And if you need a pitch sensation to have a pitched musical instrument. The spectrum of these instruments is like this, that the main energy is within the first 3 partials, and above them the energy is gone. And this is because of its highly viscoelastic problem. The damping in such a drum is very strong, and the energy is not very fast. This is a leather membrane covered with lacquer, which is causing very much damping, viscoelastic damping. And in terms of physical modeling, what I did here is to build up a physical modeling based on the differential equation of the membrane, and add an idea of a viscoelasticity, which means here a time delay system where the stress is depending on all the strains of previous time points. So you got a memory effect in the membrane. This is what viscoelasticity is all about. Then you change from the normal membrane, where you have a damping term here at the end, to a viscoelastic membrane where the damping is caused by the time delay. And if you do so, you end up in a discrete model. You see when you add more and more paste, then the modes of this instrument is changing. You don't see it too much in the fundamental mode, but you see it here in the higher modes, where this is without a paste and this is with a complete covering of paste. And the idea is that the radius of the paste is increasing. And then you see that the mode shapes are changing considerably, and therefore also the frequency of these modes change. So you got two things. You got a different radiation, and you got a different tuning of the frequencies. And if you do it in a systematic way, you see that these are the harmonic partials. At the beginning, when it's not tuned, you are nearly at 3 and 2, but you need the pace to tune the pitch of the instrument. So you put an pace, then you change the pitch the way you want it, and then you need to decide how you distribute the pitch over the drum. And if you are covered about half of that, then you're in a good shape that the 1-to-3 and 1-to-2 pitch ratios actually exist. So these Padwayne players actually do not only tune the tuning system, but also the overtone structure. I have some sounds which come from the physical modeling. Only to give you an idea, if you have a drum which is not viscoelastically damped, it would sound like this. This is not a drum, this is something like a metal plate, but if you do the viscoelastic damping, yeah, you end up in a drum sound which sounds quite drum-like. This is the back membrane without and with visco. Yeah. And this is for different tunings of the back and the front membrane. If they are tuned the same, the back and the front membrane, then the sound is sustained. And if they're not tuned the same, it's gone very fast. So this is what we expect. The model works very well. It's demanding. It's programmed on a graphic card, and because it's very time-consuming to do these things. We end up in the conclusions here. I go briefly through it because I want to get you another example. This was an example how useful physical modeling can be to estimate musical instrument sounds and understand musical instruments itself. And the interesting thing here is that you have a trade-off. There's somebody want to play melodies on a drum set. So how do you do that? You have a percussion instrument which is normally not pitched, so you need to change the overtone structure. And they change it with a paste here, but at the same time they change the tuning system of that. And so you've got a trade-off between what you want and the constraints of your instrument, what it's able to do. And this, I think, is an enhancement of the understanding of these musical instruments, why they sound the way they do. And on the other side, we can use this physical model in an archive if we have the physical model algorithm working on a system. And so if somebody could go into that and model the instrument, change the geometry a little bit, and let the computer calculate how the sound would sound like if somebody would build it that way. And by changing it here and there, one might understand much better why the instruments are built the way they are built, actually. Another instrument which was much fun, and but also a good example of another technique, is the microphone array, and here the lunette. This is not very well known, but it's a very nice instrument. It's from New Ireland, and these are two lunette players. You can sit it while you're standing, you can sit it while you're sitting, and you have got some examples because it's a friction instrument. You rub your finger over the wood, and it makes sounds, and the sounds are supposed to sound like birds or frogs. Here's an example for a bird. And here's an example of a frog. Well, it's not the frogs I have in my place, but it's supposed to be a frog. And if the whole ensemble is playing of many lunettes, it's quite interesting. Okay, I think you got the point. That sounds a little bit like jungle. It has been used for several purposes. For example, for initiation rites, reads that that the male announce or ask the spirits to come, and then the spirit sounds are the sounds of the lunettes. But it was also used for entertainment, actually. This is the instrument, and the question here is, it is more or less extinguished, but there are tourist lunettes, but they don't sound. They only look like that. So why is this? So if you have a microphone array, we have a microphone array, 128 microphones. You can put them in front of the instrument, and then you get an estimation of how it is radiating and therefore how it is vibrating. So before that we had the physical modeling, now we have the measurement. And let's see if this video is working. There's a high-speed camera video. This is working. It's only slightly, but you see the finger rubbing over the structure. It's a stick-slip motion. If you come close, you clearly see it. I don't know if you see it here. You see it. Now it's sticking. Now it's slipping again. Now it's sticking. Now it's slipping again. Maybe you see this briefly. It's like a violin bow, sticking and slipping. So it's a friction instrument. This is an interesting sort of musical instrument, by the way. Also historically, what happened there in the 18th, 19th century. Another example of a friction instrument is the chicken. If you you may know this. Okay, the chicken. These are three sounds of the instruments. We can see that there's a fundamental of the lunate instrument, not the chicken, which comes from the Übersee Museum in Bremen. They have two which are still working, which are quite old, 100 years old. The oldest one is in Stuttgart in the museum. And you see a fundamental, but you see very many overtones of the instruments. It's also the sound which you hear. And they are more or less harmonic, that you can listen to pitches. And from there you can estimate frequencies and see which frequencies are actually the ones we are listening to. Now if you're playing this and look at the results of the acoustic camera, it shows us where the radiation comes from. This is the lowest lamella, so this is if you rub over this lamella here. And what you see is that the chambers below both the lowest and the middle lamella radiate, and they radiate in antiphase. If one is going in, the other is going out. And this means to make this lamella loud, that you can really use the instrument, you cannot simply say, okay, I have a resonant chamber below that lamella, and this will do. You need to have two resonance chambers, because the pitch is so low that a resonance chamber, which would radiate that sound, would be much too big to work. So you need to build these two resonance chambers that they interact one to another. But you you need to choose then a volume of the second one, and if you compare this here with and if you play the middle lamella, then the question is, how does that work? And so the story goes on, and in the end you have a combination of all these different radiating resonant chambers, which leads to a radiation of that instrument. If this is a small finite element solution of the plate, and if you compare the frequencies played, you see that only this frequency, this is the motion of the plate. There is no other motion on this, and you can knock on then, and you see the same thing. That when you play the lowest lamella, or when you knock on different lamellas, there's more or less a decoupling between the highest lamella in the radiating chamber and the lower ones. So if you build this instrument, you need to know precisely how to build these chambers below the lamellas to actually make it sound, make it loud, because it's a very loud instrument. So you play it in a normal room, you say, wow, amazing, how loud this is if you only rub over the surface. So this is the building principle behind this, and otherwise you would not get a reasonable sound out of a friction instrument. But this friction process is an interesting process because it is so near to what we do with the vocal folds. And therefore you can have very much articulation with the friction process. And this leads to very interesting semantic associations, like here with frogs or birds or ghost spirits of ancestors. Got other examples here, and you've got reverberations of the lamella. So this is another example how you could use microphone arrays in this. To conclude my talk, we've seen the standard MIR tools, but the suggestion is to also include physical modeling and also microphone array techniques in an archive. The idea here would be that we have the musical instruments in the archive, have the measurements of the microphone array, and have them available to the people who are looking for that. We see that the sound often of musical instruments is a compromise between what is desired and what is possible. This is also an idea, I didn't talk about this here, how to approach tonal systems in Southeast Asia, because it's always a miracle how these tonal systems come into place. In my fieldwork, I very often found that it is a compromise. It's a temperament between what the people want and what they can with the musical instruments. So going into the physics of musical instruments, I think it's a very good tool to get a deeper understanding of what is really going on in the music and why the music sounds the way it is, why the tonal systems are the way they are, why the timbre is the way they are. So I think this more or less concludes my talk, and I would say we may have, we start a little bit later, so maybe we have some minutes for discussion, and then we'd change to the next talk. So thank you.